Hey guys, tonight we stand together on a narrow strip of rock, surrounded by dark water that breathes in and out with the tide. As you arrive at a 19th century lighthouse just before nightfall, you can almost feel the salt settling on your clothes. That fine, you're standing there, invisible dust that never quite leaves once it touches you. The tower rises above you, pale and solid, the kind of structure that seems calm only because it has already accepted every possible storm. Somewhere above, the lamp is waiting, unlit for now, patient. You probably won't survive this. Not in the dramatic sense, but in the way modern attention spans tend to wither after about 12 quiet minutes. And that's okay. That's the point. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're settling in, feel free to drop a comment telling me where you're listening from and what the local time is for you right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step closer to the lighthouse door, heavy wood swollen from decades of damp air. In the 19th century, lighthouses like this one dotted coastlines across Britain, the United States, and much of Europe, serving as vital navigation aids for commercial shipping. That's the mainstream fact everyone agrees on. Without these lights, maritime trade would have been slower, riskier, and significantly more expensive. What people talk about less is how lonely the job was once the boats sailed past and the evening stretched open like an empty notebook page. As you push the door inward, it groans in a way that feels almost conversational, as if the building itself is acknowledging your arrival. You are now, for all practical purposes, alone. You're standing there. Some lighthouse keepers worked with assistants or family members, but many spent long evenings with only the sea and their own routines for company. Historians still argue whether this isolation was seen as a hardship or a benefit, depending on the keeper's personality and prior life on land. Inside, the air smells faintly of oil, metal, and old stone. It's cooler than you expect even in summer, because thick masonry walls were designed to withstand storms. You're standing, not comfort. You hang your coat on a hook that's been smoothed shiny by countless hands before yours. That hook is a small. You're standing there, almost invisible reminder that you are part of a long chain of people who stood exactly where you're standing now, wondering how on earth they were going to pass the next several hours without losing their minds. There's a peculiar tidbit often mentioned in keeper memoirs. Many new arrivals talk to the lighthouse out loud during their first weeks, narrating their actions like a sports commentator with no audience. And now, you're trimming the wick, you might mutter, just to hear a human voice in the room. Psychologists today might nod knowingly at this, but back then it was just considered one of those harmless quirks of the job. You glance around and notice how sparse everything is. No unnecessary furniture. You're standing there, no decorations beyond perhaps a calendar or a framed instruction notice. This was intentional. Lighthouse authorities believed that simplicity reduced distractions and mistakes. A distracted keeper could mean a dim light, and a dim light could mean a ship running aground. Historians still argue whether strict minimalism actually improved performance or simply reflected Victorian ideas about discipline and moral order. Outside, the sky darkens slowly, not all at once, but in layers. Blues deep, then soften toward gray. The sea mirrors this change, its surface becoming less readable, more abstract. You feel time stretching already. This is your first hint of how evenings here, passing not through events, but through gradual shifts in light, sound, and mood. You walk a slow circle around the ground floor, listening to your footsteps echo. Even that echo becomes a companion of sorts. In the 1800s, many keepers learned to read subtle differences in sound within their towers, noticing when something was slightly off. A new rattle might mean a loose fitting. A different echo could suggest dampness creeping where it shouldn't. That level of attentiveness filled time in a way scrolling a phone never could. Though, you're standing there. To be fair, you don't have a phone, and even if you did, there's no signal here. Congratulations, you've achieved accidental digital detox. You're standing there, there's a logbook resting on a small desk, thick and serious looking. You'll deal with it later. You're standing there. But for now, it reminds you that your presence here will be recorded in careful handwriting. Every evening had to be accounted for. Weather noted. Lamp condition described. Any passing ships observed. The routine hasn't started yet, but it's looming politely. You pause by a narrow window and look out. You're standing there. Somewhere far off, a ship's silhouette slides across the horizon, unaware of you as an individual, utterly dependent on you as a function. You're standing there. That's the quiet power of the role. No applause, no thanks, just the steady expectation that you'll do your job. Historians still argue whether lighthouse keepers selves as unsung heroes or simply as workers doing what needed to be done. A light joke slips in. You're standing there. Because it has tog if you were hoping for evening entertainment being staring at water and polishing glass. You have come to the wrong century. The lighthouse does not offer trivia night. The sea does not tell jokes back. And yet, people stayed in this job for years, sometimes decades. As the first stars appear, you realize this arrival moment is important. It sets the tone. Everything from here on will be slow, deliberate, and oddly comforting if you let it be. You're standing there. You are no longer measuring time in notifications or episodes, but in tasks, sounds, and the patient turning of the earth beneath the beam you will soon light. You begin the climb almost without thinking, because that's how it was always done. The spiral staircase curves upward in a steady, narrow coil. You're standing there, hugging the inside of the tower like a patient thought winding its way through your mind. Each step is worn slightly in the center, your shallow dip shaped by decades of boots going up and down, often in silence. In the 19th century, most lighthouse towers were built with these tight spirals not for elegance, but for strength. Curves distributed weight better and resisted wind, which meant your nightly climb was also an architectural compromise between gravity and weather. As you place your hand on the central column, it feels cool. You're standing there, faintly damp and reassuringly solid. You climb at a measured pace because rushing here serves no one. You're standing there. Experienced keepers knew that steady movement conserved energy and reduced mistakes later. Historians still argue whether these slow, ritualized climbs helped keepers maintain mental calm or simply reflected institutional obsession with order. The sound of your boots on stone becomes rhythmic, almost meditative. Step, breath. But it's the kind of rhythm that gently pushes other thoughts aside. Modern mindfulness apps would charge a monthly fee this experience, but you get it free, bundled with mild knee strain. That's joke one for this section. Use it wisely and then let it drift away. Along the way, you pass small landings where narrow windows slit the tower wall. Through them, the outside world appears in fragments, a slice of darkening sky, a smear of sea foam, a line of horizon. These brief views are intentional pauses. Many keepers described using them as mental checkpoints, tiny rewards during the climb. Quirky tidbits, some even assigned names to these windows. You're standing there like North Glance or Evening Eye, though this was never official and would probably get you a raised eyebrow during inspection. You notice how the air changes as you climb. Lower down, it smelled of stone and oil. Higher up, there's a faint metallic tang mixed with old dust. This is the scent of machinery waiting to be used. The lamp room sits at the top like a crown, and everything in the tower leads toward it. Mainstream historical fact: before automation, lighthouse keepers were responsible for physically carrying fuel, oil, or later kerosene, up these stairs, sometimes multiple times a day. That alone could make evenings feel long before they even began. Your breathing settles into a pattern that matches the climb. There's no music here, no voices. You're standing there, just you and the soft echo of movement. Some keepers reportedly counted steps as a way to mark time. You're standing there, while others deliberately avoided counting to prevent monotony from feeling oppressive. Historians still argue whether such personal rituals were encouraged informally or developed quietly out of necessity. Halfway up, you pause. Not because you're exhausted, but because pauses are part of the routine. Leaning slightly against the wall, you listen. The tower responds with subtle sounds, the wind brushing stone, a faint creak as the structure adjusts to temperature changes, the distant hush of waves. This listening wasn't idle. Keepers trained themselves to notice when something sounded wrong. A new creak could signal expansion. A drip might mean a leak. Boredom, oddly enough, sharpened awareness. There's a peculiar calm that comes from knowing exactly what you're supposed to be doing and where you're supposed to be. Up here, evenings weren't filled with decisions, just sequences. Climb. Check. Light. Repeat. Modern life would call this repetitive. Your nervous system quietly calls it relief. As you continue upward, you think about how many evenings you'll repeat this climb. Hundreds. Thousands. You're standing there, the idea should feel daunting, but instead it feels oddly stabilizing. That's another thing scholars debated, whether long-term keepers were unusually resilient people to begin with, or whether the job itself reshaped them into calmer, more routine-oriented individuals. You reach the final turn in the staircase and the space opens slightly. The ceiling lifts. The air feels different. Warmer, drier. You know you're close now. Your hand brushes the railing, polished smooth not just by ease but by care. Keepers were expected to maintain cleanliness everywhere, including stairs. Dust wasn't just unsightly, it was a sign of negligence. And negligence in Lighthouse terms was practically a moral failing. A second light joke floats big. If this were a gym routine, it would be called functional fitness with maritime consequences. You smile briefly, then let the thought dissolve. At the top, you're stopped before the final door, not opening it yet. This pause matters. It's the threshold between ascent and responsibility, between moving and tending. Evenings begin properly here, with this quiet moment of stillness after exertion. You take one last breath, steady and unhurried. You're standing there, ready to step into the long stretch of hours ahead, where the climb will echo in your legs long after your feet stop moving. You're standing there, you ease the door open and step into the lamp room, where the heart of the lighthouse waits in careful silence. The Fresnel lens rises before you in concentric rings of glass, catching the last traces of daylight and bending them into faint, shimmering patterns. This is the centerpiece of your evening, the reason the tower exists at all. Mainstream historical facting, the Fresnel lens, developed in the early 19th century, revolutionized lighthouse technology by allowing light to be seen from much farther away using less fuel. Without it, you're standing there. Coastlines would remain far more dangerous long into the industrial age. You move closer, slow and deliberate. The glass smells faintly of oil and cleaning solution, a scent that has soaked into the room over decades. Polishing the lens is not a quick task. You're standing there, it's done with soft cloths, careful pressure, and an almost unreasonable amount of patience. You're standing there. Keepers often spent several hours each day cleaning and maintaining the lens, even though to an outsider it might already look spotless. You're standing there. Historians still argue whether this level of meticulousness was truly necessary, or whether it served as a way to keep keepers occupied and attentive. As you begin your work, you notice how the lens magnifies and distorts everything behind it. Your own reflection bends into strange shapes, stretched and compressed. It's quietly entertaining, like a fuel-house mirror designed a very serious engineer. Quirky tidbit: some keepers reportedly amuse themselves by making faces at their distorted reflections during cleaning. Though this small rebellion was never written down in official reports. You polish one panel at a time, moving in slow, overlapping circles. You're standing there. The motion is repetitive but soothing, your hands learning the shape and resistance of the glass. There's a rhythm here that doesn't need thought. This is standing there, this is how long evenings pass. Not by distraction, but by immersion. Each panel cleaned is a small, measurable accomplishment. And there are many panels. The lamp itself sits at the center, waiting to be lit. Depending on the period, it might burn whale oil, coal's oil, or later kerosene. By the mid-19th century, many lighthouses had transitioned away from whale oil, both because of cost and declining whale populations. That's a fact often mentioned in textbooks. You're standing there, but what's less discussed is how the change or the smell of the lamp room. Keepers noticed. They always noticed. You're standing there. Historians still argue whether these sensory shifts affected morale or were simply accepted as part of technological progress. You're standing there. You check the mechanism that allows the lens to rotate, ensuring it will turn smoothly once lit. Some lenses were mounted on mercury baths to reduce friction, an innovation that sounds alarming but worked remarkably well. Yes, you are standing near a pool of mercury, but no one in your time seems particularly worried about that. Different century, different anxieties. A light joke slips in. You're standing there. If you're wondering whether occupational health and safety had a suggestion box, the answer is no, and if it did, it would be full of very polite complaints written in perfect cursive. You smile, then return to your task. As twilight deepens outside, you adjust the wicks. You're trimming them evenly to ensure a steady flame. Wick trimming is an art. Too long and the flame smokes. Too short and the light dims. You're standing there. Keepers develop personal preferences here, small variations that inspectors tolerated as long as the light burned true. Historians still argue whether these individual techniques affected visibility in any measurable way or simply reflected human habit. You glance out through the glass panes of the lantern room. The world beyond has softened into silhouettes and gradients. Ships will soon rely on you entirely. You're standing there, that knowledge settles in your chest, not as pressure but as focus. There's no rush. You have time to do this properly. The final polish reveals a clarity that feels almost ceremonial. You step back and inspect your work, not with pride exactly, but with satisfaction. You're standing there. This lens has been cleaned hundreds of times before and will be cleaned hundreds of times again. Your contribution is temporary but necessary. That paradox is oddly comforting. You strike the flame and watch as light blooms at the center, reflected and multiplied by the glass until the room glows warmly. The mechanism engages, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, the beam begins its rotation. Outside, somewhere far off, you're standing there. A sailor might notice the first sweep of light and adjust course without ever thinking about you. That's how evenings pass here, through careful tending, through quiet competence, through the slow satisfaction of knowing that while nothing dramatic is happening, everything important is exactly as it should be. With the lamp burning steadily above you, your attention turns to the less glamorous, but equally time-consuming work: oil, wicks, and patience. You move back down a level to the storage area where cans of fuel are kept in neat rows, each one labeled and sealed. In the 19th century, lighthouse authorities required precise accounting of fuel usage. Mainstream historical fact keepers could be fined or dismissed for discrepancies in oil records. You're standing there because missing fuel suggested either negligence or theft, neither of which inspired confidence in maritime safety. You lifting there after can and feel its weight pull gently at your arm. Fuel handling is done slowly, not because you're weak, but because spilling oil creates more work and more smell. Whale seeps into everything, and once it's there, it never quite leaves. You're standing there. The floorboards here carry faint, dark stains from decades of careful, imperfect pouring. You're standing there. Historians still argue whether these stains were tolerated as inedible or secretly judged during inspections. You're standing there. You measure out the evening's supply using a graduated container, eyes level with the markings. This is the kind of task that demands attention without excitement, which is precisely why it fills time so effectively. Your mind settles into the measurement, into the quiet logic of quantities. Quirky tidbit, you're standing there. Some keepers reportedly developed a near-instinctive sense for volume, able to pour exact amounts without looking, a skill that impressed visitors and unsettled new assistants. Once the oil is measured, you tend to spare wicks. They're laid out carefully, inspected for fraying, trimmed, and set aside. Wick care was essential. A poorly prepared wick could ruin an entire evening's work by producing smoke that clouded the lens. You're standing there, and clouded lenses meant angry letters from shipping companies. You're standing there. Historians still argue whether the strict wick standards came from actual performance data or from a broader Victorian obsession with cleanliness and control. You sit at a small table and work through this process slowly. There's no need to hurry. In fact, hurrying is discouraged. Speed leads to mistakes. You're standing there, and mistakes lead to long nights correcting them. The repetitive snip of scissors. You're standing there, the soft brush of fingers over fabric. These sounds become part of the lighthouse's nighttime rhythm. A light joke floats through your thoughts queue. If you ever wanted a job that combines the thrill of bookkeeping with the excitement of textile maintenance, congratulations, you found it. The joke drifts away, leaving behind a mild appreciation for how oddly specific your skill set has become. Outside, the wind picks up slightly, rattling a window frame. You pause, listening. You're standing there, not alarmed, just attentive. Weather changes matter here, and you'll log them later. For now, you return to your wicks, ensuring they're dry and evenly cut. Your fuel preparation also includes checking reserves. You count cans, compare them mentally to last week's numbers, and feel a small satisfaction when they match. This quiet confirmation is another way evenings pass. Not with surprises, but with reassurance. Historians still argue whether such repetitive checks reduced anxiety or, paradoxically, created it by making keepers hyper-aware of potential shortages. When everything is ready, you carry what's needed back up, careful on the stairs. The climb feels different now, slower weighted. But your body adjusts. This is another unspoken benefit of the routine physical familiarity. Your muscles learn the tower as well as your mind does. You refill the lamp's reservoir, watching the oil level rise. The flame responds subtly, steadying itself. There's something deeply satisfying about this cause and effect relationship. You do a thing and the light behaves. Simple, predictable, comforting. As you finish, you clean up meticulously. Clothes or folds returned. Surfaces wiped. This isn't just habit, it's doctrine. Inspectors could arrive unannounced, and disorder was seen as a sign of moral laxity. Historians still argue whether this moral framing of cleanliness was fair or simply convenient for management. With fuel and wicks tended, you find yourself with time again. Not empty time, but open time. The lamp is burning, the oil is measured, the wicks are ready. The evening stretches ahead, calm and unhurried, waiting to be filled with the small, steady acts that keep the light alive. You descend again, this time toward the keeper's quarters, and the shift in atmosphere is immediate. The air feels slightly warmer, less metallic, more human. You're standing there as rooms are tucked into the tower or attached just beside it, depending on the lighthouse, and they are as plain as everything else you've seen so far. You're standing there, mainstream historical fact, most 19th century lighthouse dwellings were intentionally sparse. You're standing there, designed to discourage distraction and reinforce the idea that the keeper's primary loyalty was to the light, not to personal comfort. You step into the main living space, which doubles as kitchen, sitting room, and occasionally office. The furniture is sturdy and unremarkable. A wooden table, a few straight-backed chairs, shelves holding basic supplies, no upholstery that would trap damp or smell, no clutter. The walls are often whitewashed, not for style, but because it made cracks and leaks easier to spot. You're standing there. Historians still argue whether this constant visual inspection contributed to a subtle background stress or simply became part of the keeper's mental landscape. You're standing there, you place a kettle on the stove, not even to boil yet, just to mark the intention of warmth later. That's how evenings work here. Small gestures toward comfort rather than indulgence. There's a narrow bed in an adjoining room. You're standing there, neatly made even though you won't touch it for hours. Beds were kept tidy at all times, partly out of discipline. You're partly because inspectors might look in without warning. Quirky tipping, some keepers slept on top of their made beds during the day rather than disturb them. A habit that sounds uncomfortable, but apparently became normal with time. You sit for a moment, letting your body register the change from movement to stillness. The chair is hard but familiar. You've sat in it countless times. In the corner, a small cupboard holds personal items, maybe a spare shirt, a tin of tea, your standing graph or two if regulations allowed. Personalization was tolerated in moderation. You're standing there. Too many personal effects suggested you were getting too settled, which administrators oddly viewed as a risk. You're standing there. Historians still argue whether this fear was based on evidence or a belief that emotional attachment weakened vigilance. You're standing there. You look around and realize how carefully everything has been placed. Nothing here is accidental. Even boredom has been organized. The quarters are not meant to entertain you. They are meant to hold you. And they do. A light joke surfaces if minimalist living had a maritime branch, this would be its headquarters. You smile faintly, then let the thought dissolve. You open a small window, just a crack, enough to hear the sea more clearly. Sound matters here. It fills space where conversation would normally live. The steady rush of waves becomes background noise, like a very large, you're standing very damp white noise machine. Some keepers found this soothing. Others found it maddening. Historians still argue whether tolerance for constant sound was a prerequisite for the job or a skill developed over time. On a shelf, you notice a small clock. You're ticking steadily. Timekeeping is essential, but also dangerous. Watching the clock too closely makes evenings feel longer. Experienced keepers learn to glance at it only when necessary. You follow that rule instinctively now, letting time pass without measuring every minute. You're standing there. You tidy a surface that's already tidy, straightening a stack of papers that didn't really need it. This is another way evenings stretch. You're standing there, through maintenance of order. It's not busy-work exactly, but it's close. And yet, there's comfort in knowing that when everything is in its place, you're standing there. There's one less thing to think about. You stand again, feeling rested enough to continue. The quarters have done their job, offering just enough pause to reset you. They are not a refuge from duty, but a quiet extension of it. As you step back toward the staircase, you carry with you the sense that this small, your controlled space is part of how lighthouse keepers endured long evenings, not by escaping them, but by shaping them into something manageable and, eventually, familiar. You're standing there. You turn your attention to supper, not because you're particularly hungry yet, but because evening meals anchor time. Cooking here is less about pleasure and more about rhythm. In the 19th century, you lighthouse keepers were responsible for feeding the cells with whatever supplies could be delivered by boat or hauled overland, often infrequently. Mainstream historical fact, many lighthouses received provisions only once a month, sometimes less in bad weather, which meant meals had to be planned carefully and repeated often. You open a cupboard and take inventory almost without thinking. Flour, salted meat, dried peas, maybe a bit of cheese wrapped carefully in cloth. Nothing fresh unless a delivery was recent, or you've been lucky enough to catch fish. The menu doesn't change much, standing there, and that's intentional. Familiar food is predictable, and predictability is calming when everything else around you is sea and sky. You set a small pot on the stove and begin preparing something simple. Perhaps a stew that's more concept than recipe. Water, a handful of peas, a few pieces of salted meat rinsed to remove some of the brine. You stir slowly, listening to the faint clink of spoon against metal. This sound joins the lighthouse's quiet orchestra, somewhere between the ticking clock and the distant waves. Quirky tidbit, some keepers became surprisingly creative within these limitations, inventing personal variations on the same basic dishes and naming them grandly. You're standing there, like keeper's pie or tower broth. Even though ingredients rarely changed, you're standing there. These names were less about impressing anyone and more about making the familiar feel intentional. Historians still argue whether such small acts of creativity helped maintain morale or were simply inevitable expressions of human stubbornness. As the pot warms, the smell begins to shift the atmosphere of the quarters. Food smells are powerful here because they're rare. They mark the transition from work to sustenance, from duty to brief rest. You cut bread thickly, because then slices feel like cheating yourself. Butter, if you have it, is used sparingly, spread with care. Waste is quietly frowned upon, even when no one is watching. You sit while the food cooks, not idly, but attentively. Leaving a pot unattended is frowned upon. You're standing there, both practically and morally. Fires are a risk, and risk is something lighthouse culture avoids whenever possible. Historians still argue whether this constant vigilance around small hazards made keepers more anxious or simply more competent. A light joke drifts in. If you were hoping for a celebrity chef cameo, the closest you'll get is a very stern instruction manual written by someone who hates seasoning. You smile, then steer again. When the meal is ready, you serve yourself without ceremony. There's no table setting beyond what's necessary. You eat slowly, partly because the food is hot, partly because there's no reason to rush. Eating quickly would only bring you sooner back to waiting. Each bite stretches time just a little, and that's a gift. You notice how quiet chewing becomes when there's no conversation. Every sound is magnified, so you learn to eat gently, almost politely, even though you're alone. This habit sticks. You're standing there. Some former keepers later remarked that they continue eating quietly long after leaving the service, a behavior that confused their families. Historians still argue whether such habits were signs of adaptation or subtle social withdrawal. As you eat, you glance occasionally toward the stairs, aware of the light above you burning steadily. Supper is never completely separate from duty. You're always half listening, half ready to respond if something changes. This split attention becomes second nature, a mental posture you hold without effort. After finishing, you clean immediately. Dishes are washed, dried, and put away. Crumbs are brushed into a tin, not left on the table. This isn't just neatness, it's pest control. Mice and insects were common companions in lighthouses. You're standing there, and food left out was an invitation. Quirky tidbits, some keepers named particularly persistent mice and considered them unofficial assistants, though they still tried very hard not to feed them. You dry your hands and feel a small sense of completion. Another task done. Another marker placed in the evening. You're standing there. The meal hasn't been exciting, but it's done its job. You're fed, grounded, and ready for the next stretch of hours. You pause, listening again to the sea through the cracked window. The smell of stew lingers faintly, mixing with oil and salt. It's not a smell you'd bottle or sell. You're standing there, but it's yours. It belongs to this place in this moment. As you stand to move on, you're standing there. You realize that these plain meals are part of how long evenings pass. Not by distracting you from the work, but by quietly supporting it. Food here doesn't demand attention. It simply exists, steady and unmarkable, much like you will for the rest of the night, keeping watch while the world sails by, unaware but dependent all the same. You find yourself drifting back toward observation, because weather is never just background here. It's an active presence. You're standing there, a conversation you're expected to follow closely, even when it seems repetitive. You step outside briefly onto a narrow walkway or stand by a window with a clear view of the horizon. In the 19th century, your lighthouse keepers were required to observe and record weather conditions several times a day. Mainstream historical facting. These observations contributed to early meteorological records long before standardized national weather services existed. You scan the sky slowly, not searching for drama, but for subtle shifts. Cloud thickness, wind direction, the way the sea surface wrinkles or smooths out. These details fill time remarkably well when you learn how to see them. What looks like just clouds, to a passerby becomes layers, movement, intention. Historians still argue whether keepers developed genuinely superior weather reading skills or whether they simply became more attentive observers through constant exposure. You note the wind first. It presses gently against your face, cool and steady, coming from the west. You don't need an instrument to tell you that. You're standing there, though an anemometer might be mounted nearby if your lighthouse is particularly well equipped. Many weren't. Quirky tidbitting, some keepers preferred their own methods anyway, like watching how smoke from the lamp vent drifted, or how seabirds adjusted their flight patterns. You linger longer than strictly necessary, because standing here is both duty and pastime. The horizon holds your attention in a way nothing else quite does. It's always changing, but never quickly. That balance is soothing. You feel time stretching, but not dragging. A light joke surfaces. You're essentially a full-time professional at staring into the distance, which sounds pathetic until you realize it's mostly gray. The thought passes, leaving behind the quiet satisfaction of having something specific to do. You step back inside and open the weather log. The page waits patiently, lines empty and ready. You write carefully, noting wind direction, clover, sea state. Penmanship matters. Sloppy writing suggests sloppy work, and sloppy work is not tolerated. Historians still argue whether this emphasis on handwriting improved record accuracy or simply reflected broader 19th century values around discipline and appearance. As you write, you realize how much of the evening is structured around observation followed by recording. See, then write, hear, then write. Even feel, then translate into words. This process slows everything down, forcing you to process experiences deliberately. It's the opposite of skimming or scrolling. Each observation takes up space on the page and in your mind. You pause between entries, listening again. The wind has shifted slightly, or maybe it hasn't. You debate it quietly with yourself. This internal dialogue is common. Keepers often mention second-guessing their own perceptions, not out of anxiety, but out of care. You're standing there. Accuracy matters, even when no one else is likely to read the entry for weeks. You make a small note about temperature, estimating based on feel rather than a thermometer if none is available. Cold here feels different than cold inland. Dampness changes everything. Your joints notice before your brain does. Historians still argue whether these subjective observations are reliable data or charming, but flawed artifacts of early record keeping. With the log updated, you return to the window once more. Night has fully settled now, and the beam sweeps across the water in steady intervals. Weather watching at night relies less on sight and more on sound. You listen to the sea's rhythm, noticing whether waves crash sharply or roll lazily. Tonight, you're standing there. They're somewhere in between. You allow yourself to stand there a little longer than required. This isn't negligence, it's engagement. The job invites this kind of attention. Long evenings pass not by ignoring the environment, but by leaning into it, letting it occupy your senses fully. Eventually, you step back from the window satisfied. The weather has been observed, recorded, and acknowledged. It hasn't surprised you, and you haven't surprised it. There's comfort in that mutual understanding. As you move on, you carry with you the sense that these quiet rituals, watching clouds, feeling wind, writing it all down, are how lighthouse keepers fill their nights. Not with excitement, but with presence. The world outside keeps moving, ships pass, storms gather elsewhere, and you remain here steady and attentive, letting the evening unfold at its own unhurried pace. You return to the desk and the logbook, because writing doesn't end with weather. The log is the official memory of the lighthouse, and you are its temporary steward. In the 19th century, keepers were expected to maintain detailed daily records covering everything from lamp condition to passing vessels. Mainstream historical facta, you're standing there. These logs were regularly reviewed by superiors and could be used to assess a keeper's diligence or lack of it. You open the heavy cover and feel the slight resistance of thick paper. The pages are lined, margins neat, inviting order. You dip your pen carefully, wiping the excess ink against the rim. Ink management is a skill in itself. Too much, and you blot. Too little, and the pen scratches. Historians still argue whether this constant fine motor control, attributed to the calm demeanor, often attributed to long-serving keepers. You begin to write, describing the lamp's performance. Flame steady, rotation smooth, no unusual smoke. Each phrase is formulaic, almost ceremonial. That's intentional. Consistency makes anomalies stand out. If something ever goes wrong, it will be obvious against this background of sameness. A quirky tidbit surfaces in your mind. You're standing there. Some keepers develop distinctive handwriting styles that inspectors came to recognize instantly, sometimes commenting on them in reports. Elegant cursive might earn praise, while cramped writing could invite suspicion. Your letters flow evenly, not flashy, not careless. Perfectly forgettable, which is exactly what you want. You note the time, glancing briefly at the clock. It's later than you thought, but that's normal. Writing absorbs time quietly. You don't feel it passing. This is one of the evening's secret trinks. As you continue, you record any ships observed. A schooner passing north, your steamer further out. You don't know their names, and you don't need to. Your job is to note presence, not identity. Historians still argue whether these vessel entries were used for navigation analysis or simply served as proof that the keeper was attentive. You pause between lines, listening to the pen scratch softly across the paper. It's a comforting sound, precise and controlled. No echo, no wind, you're standing there, just ink meeting fiber. In a world of waves and storms, this small certainty matters. A light joke drifts through. You're standing there. You're basically journaling for someone who may never read it, which is either deeply philosophical or deeply bureaucratic. You smile faintly and keep writing. There's a rhythm to this work. Write a line. Pause. Think. Write another. It mirrors the rhythm of the beam above you, sweeping, returning, sweeping again. Over time, you're standing there. These rhythms sync, and the evening begins to feel cohesive rather than long. You reach the end of the page and feel a quiet satisfaction. Turning the page is a small milestone. It means time has moved, progress has been made. You smooth the new page with your hand before continuing, aligning it just so. Order maintained. You add a note about the weather again, cross-referencing your earlier entry. Redundancy is not discouraged. In fact, it's preferred. You're better to repeat than to omit. Historians still argue whether this redundancy reflects a lack of trust in individual observation or a robust system designed to catch errors. As you close the logbook, you rest your hand on it for a moment. This book will outlast you. Long after you leave, someone else will write in it, and someone else after them. Your handwriting will blend into a continuum of care, indistinguishable unless someone looks very closely. You stand and stretch. You're feeling the slight stiffness that comes from sitting too long. Writing is restful for the mind, but not for the body. You're standing there. You roll your shoulders gently and take a deep breath. With the log complete for now, you feel another pocket of open time settle around you. The evening hasn't rushed you, and you haven't rushed it. This balance is the essence of lighthouse life. You glance once more toward the stairs leading up, aware of the light continuing its steady work. Everything is in order. The sea hasn't changed its mind. The lamp hasn't faltered. The logbook tells the story of a quiet, competent night so far. And so, with ink drying and pages filled, you move on, carrying with you the calm that comes from having written the evening into existence, line by careful line. After finishing your log entries, you're settled into the corner with a book. Reading by lamplight is one of the few diversions allowed in a 19th century lighthouse, and it's more a tool for companionship than entertainment. Mainstream historical fact, keepers often had a small library of donated or personally acquired books. You're standing there ranging from technical manuals to novels, providing mental agement during long nights. The selection was usually limited by supply and weight. Shipping a trunk full of novels was expensive and impractical. So you quickly learn to savor each volume. You lift a well-worn copy and feel the smooth, softened of pages turned countless times by previous hands. The smell is faintly musty, a mix of paper, sea salt. You're standing there, and perhaps a whisper of ink. It's comforting. This sensory connection to other people who have lived the same life. Historians still argue whether such tactile habits provided true mental relief or were simply a way to stave off boredom. Quirky tidbit: some keepers reportedly read the same short stories repeatedly, not because they forgot the plot, but because the predictability was soothing. You're standing there, the words became a familiar rhythm against the unpredictable elements outside. You find yourself drawn to that practice? You're letting sentences wrap around you like a warm blanket, each chapter ending a small, deliberate moment. You hold the book closer. You're standing there, letting the lamplight highlight the words. You notice details you may have skipped in the daylight, the curve of a letter, a smudge in the margin. You're perhaps a tiny annotation from a prior reader. These small discoveries become part of your evening, a quiet intellectual treasure hunt. Historians still argue whether these annotations offer insight into the keeper's personalities or are merely incidental markings. Outside, the beam continues its steady rotation. You glance up occasionally, not out of concern, but to stay grounded. Even while reading, your mind keeps one eye on duty. The lamp is your anchor, the book is your companion. Both exist simultaneously, weaving a pattern of attention and leisure. As you turn the pages, you notice the rhythm of your own breathing synchronizing with the slow sweep of the light above. Each paragraph lasts just as long as a complete rotation. Step, word, sweep, sentence. Your body and the lighthouse move in quiet tandem, almost imperceptibly connected. A light joke occurs. If you ever wanted a book club where everyone was perpetually quiet and judging your punctuation, congratulations, you found it. You smile faintly, savoring the private amusement. This is the kind of humor that thrives here, understated, fleeting, gentle. The stories themselves offer more than mere distraction. They provide patterns of human behavior, morality, and imagination which you chew over slowly. Each character becomes a minor companion in your isolation. Sometimes, you're standing there, you whisper a line aloud to hear it in the still room, reinforcing the presence of life, however fictional. Historians still argue whether reading aloud was common or frowned upon, given the potential to disturb any sleeping assistants or family members. You occasionally close your eyes between passages, letting the words linger, allowing the rhythmic pulse of the sea and the beam to fill in the spaces between sentences. This is meditation in disguise, letting language, light, and water intertwine into a calm, almost hypnotic state. Time passes without urgency. You mark progress not by chapter numbers, but by the slow movement of the light, by the subtle changes in wind against the window, by the quiet persistence of the night. Your each page read is a moment captured, each paragraph a deliberate step through an evening that could otherwise stretch endlessly. Eventually, you pause in the middle of a paragraph, pen in hand to make a small note in the margin, a thought about the story, a reminder for tomorrow, a personal reflection. You're standing there. These annotations create a private dialogue with yourself, echoing the solitary conversations keepers often held aloud in the tower. You're standing there. It's a habit that comforts and occupies in equal measure. You place the book down gently, careful not to disturb its fragile spine. Your attention drifts for a moment to lamp and its steady glow. The rhythm of light and shadow, story and silence sustains you. The evening continues, not rushed, not dull, but quietly alive. The lamp continues its slow, dependable rotation as you reach for the next evening task letters. You gather paper, envelopes, and a quill or pen, preparing to correspond with loved ones far away. In the 19th century, mail was infrequent, often delayed by weeks or months due to weather or boat schedules. Mainstream historical fact: many lighthouse keepers relied on letters not just to maintain social ties, but to confirm that life on land continued, preserving a sense of connection in the middle of isolation. You sit at the small desk, feeling the texture of the paper beneath your fingers. Writing here is deliberate, slower than modern communication. Each stroke matters because mistakes aren't easily corrected. You measure your words carefully, balancing news, reassurance, and attention to clarity. Historians still argue whether this formality improved communication or simply heightened the sense of distance between sender and recipient. Quirky tidbit: some keepers included tiny sketches of the lighthouse or nearby coastline in their letters. Not maps for navigation necessarily, but whimsical doodles to make the letter more personal. It's a subtle rebellion against the stark, utilitarian life you lead. You dip the pen into the ink and begin. You're standing there. Each word takes time. You describe the day's routine, the progress on polishing the lens, the quality of the evening meal. Perhaps a small anecdote about the wind or the behavior of the gulls outside. You are acutely aware that your correspondent might read these notes weeks later, imagining the precise movements you've described. There's a strange intimacy in that delay, a suspension of time where your actions ripple outward slowly. You're standing there. You pause occasionally to blot the ink and ensure it doesn't smear. These micro moments stretch the night, adding to the sense that each task, however mundane, occupies its own space. Historians still argue whether the repetition of such meticulous letter writing had a meditative effect or reinforced feelings of isolation. A light joke crosses your mind if your audience is a single friend who doesn't read quickly. Congratulations, you've just invented slow-my ASMR. You smile and continue, letting the thought drift away. You fold the paper carefully and slip it into its envelope, sealing it with wax if available, or a simple lick. You're standing there in the 19th century. Wax seals were not just decorative. They confirmed authenticity and kept prying eyes at bay. Some keepers personalized seals with initials or symbols, adding a personal touch that was subtle but meaningful. Next, you consider what to say about your own thoughts. You're standing there, but realize that restraint is part of the ritual. Letters aren't journals, though they often overlap. You must provide comfort without oversharing. You're standing there, observation without overwhelming. It's a delicate balance, and one you've grown accustomed to. Historians still argue whether these constraints promoted self-discipline or subtly suppressed emotional expression. Once the letters are ready, you set them aside for collection, a reminder of your place in a wider network. Even in the tower's isolation, the outside world nudges back. You're standing there, tethering you to distant lands, loved ones, and the slow march events you can no longer influence directly. You lean back, reflecting on the quiet diligence required for correspondence. It's more than writing. It's pacing, measuring, and mindfulness disguised as duty. You're standing there. Each stroke of the pen is both work and ritual, bridging distance and solitude. Finally, you close your writing tools, you're content that the letters are ready and the moment preserved. The room is silent again, save for the lamp and the distant, constant sea. You allow yourself a deep breath, letting the stillness settle around you, knowing the next long task awaits. But for now, the night feels gently ordered, alive in its quiet persistence. You're standing there, with your letters prepared and your logbook updated. You turn back to the more physical chores maintenance after dark. The idea of repairing, cleaning, and adjusting may not sound thrilling, but in a lighthouse, these small tasks dominate your evening. Mainstream historical facting: you're standing there. A 19th century keeper's duties include inspecting every part of the tower, from railings and stairs to the lantern mechanism, often several times a night to ensure safety and efficiency. You gather your tools, a hammer, oil for hinges, your few spare screws, and move carefully through the corridors and stairwell. Nighttime maintenance is subtle. It doesn't involve bright lights or loud hammering. You're standing there. You work by the soft glow of the lamp, shadows stretching along the walls, revealing imperfections only when you look closely. Historians still argue whether such constant vigilance was more preventative than practical, or whether it simply reinforced a culture of meticulousness. Quirky tidbit: some keepers kept tiny notebooks specifically for noting minor repairs, cataloging each scratch and squeak, as if chronicling the life of the building itself. You open your mental notebook now, noting which hinges creak and which rails need tightening. The repetition, strangely, is calming. You tighten a loose bolt on the railing, hearing the faint click as it sets firmly. Each successful repair is a small, silent triumph. Outside, the wind howls softly against the tower, but inside, your movements are deliberate and contained. Even minor maintenance becomes a form of meditation. You're standing there, your attention fully occupied by tangible results. You scrape away a bit of rust from a metal fitting. You're breathing in the faint metallic scent that mingles with oil and stone. Keeping metal surfaces in good condition prevents long-term corrosion, a practical matter, but the act itself also absorbs your focus. Historians still argue whether this obsessive care improved safety measurably or simply kept keepers mentally engaged during slow evenings. A light joke drifts through. If you ever wanted a career in professional hinge appreciation, congratulations, you're in the right century. The humor is quiet, internal, part of the rhythm of solitude. You inspect the floorboards, tapping lightly to check for weaknesses. Each note reverberates in the tower's hollow core. Over time, you're standing there. You've learned to distinguish the subtle difference between a harmless echo and a board that might need reinforcement. The same skill applies to listening to the sea. Small changes indicate shifts in conditions, both outside and within the tower. You pause to admire your work, or rather, you're standing there, the absence of noticeable problems. The screws are tight, the rails secure, the boards solid. Your act of completing these tasks provides a sense of accomplishment disproportionate to their apparent simplicity. Quirky tidbit: you're standing there. Some keepers reported feeling a peculiar pride in polishing a single brass, fitting until it shone, calling it their evening triumph. Even though no one else would ever see it, the lamp above rotates steadily, casting long, soft shadows across the stairwell. Your movements, small and deliberate, fit into this rhythm. Each repair, each adjustment is a quiet conversation with the tower, a dialogue conducted in care and attention rather than words. You step back, wiping your hands on a cloth, and take a slow breath. Maintenance isn't glamorous. You're standing heroic. But it keeps everything funked smoothly and fills long hours with a steady sense of purpose. Historians still argue whether these hours were burdensome or provided a meditative space, a zone where keepers could exist fully in the present, uninterrupted by external demands. Listening to the faint creak of a repaired hinge settling into place, you feel the evening's tempo slow, deliberate. You're standing there, and gently satisfying. The work is done for now, leaving you poised to move into the quieter phase of the night, where observation, reflection, you're standing there, and stillness take precedence. You step away from the tools and pause, letting the night settle fully around you. Because now it's time for one of the simplest yet most profound rituals: listening to the sea. There's no clock, no book, no logbook here, only sound and space. Your mainstream historical fact keepers often reported that attentive listening helped them detect storm ships or subtle shifts in tide. You're standing there, turning passive observation into an active form of duty. It's a form of vigilance that doesn't require motion, only attention. You're standing there. You sit near the window or on the stair landing and close your eyes. The waves move with a rhythm older than the lighthouse itself, an ancient cadence that neither hurries nor waits. You notice differences in the sound, the heavier crash of a distant swell, the lighter patter of small waves on rocks. You stand there, the occasional whisper of wind across the tower stone. Historians still argue whether prolonged exposure to these repetitive sounds calmed keepers or slowly rewired their sense of time, making days stretch and compress in unusual ways. Quirky tidbit: some keepers believed that the sea spoke in a language only attentive ears could hear, A particularly persistent swell might be a warning, a lull, a sign to relax. While obviously not literal communication, the belief shaped how evenings were perceived. You're standing there. You find yourself nodding subtly, even though you know it's metaphorical. There's comfort in the ritual of listening, a sense of participating in something far larger than yourself. You notice how attention to sound stretches time. One wave, one breath. Another wave, another thought. You can feel the steady pulse of the lighthouse behind you, the light sweeping across the water in perfect rhythm with the unseen tides. A subtle joke drifts through your mind. If you were training for the Olympics of passive listening, congratulations, you'd already be winning gold. You chuckle quietly. You're standing there, letting it blend with the ambient noise. The wind outside shifts slightly, rustling through the tower's crevices. You lean closer, allowing the small changes to register. Even the distant cry of a seabird becomes part of this nocturnal orchestra, punctuating the steady hiss of water. Historians still argue whether keepers developed a heightened sensitivity to these minor cues or merely learned to project meaning onto randomness. As you sit, your thoughts wander gently. You reflect on the repetitive but purposeful task completed so far: to climbing stairs, tending the lamp, polishing the lens, measuring oil. You're preparing wicks, cooking, writing logs and letters. Listening to the sea is both continuation and contrast. No action required, only perception. The calm amplifies your previous work, giving it resonance you didn't notice while performing it. A quiet smile forms as you think about the patterns of your evening. You're standing there. Just as the beam rotates consistently, the waves follow their own steady cycle. Your movements have mimicked this pattern, reinforcing the natural order of the night. The lighthouse itself becomes a participant in your meditation, its walls transmitting both sound and reassurance. Quirky tidbit: some keepers imagine the tower itself as a silent companion, leaning slightly with the wind and creaking in response, as if acknowledging your presence. You shift slightly, adjusting your posture to ease minor stiffness. The simple act of sitting and listening feels luxurious, given the physical labor you've completed earlier. Here, stillness is both reward and responsibility. Each minute, each wave, each sound reinforces that you are exactly where you are supposed to be. Eventually, you allow your mind to drift with the sound. Thoughts come and go. You're standing there, but you remain anchored by the steady pulse of sea and beam. The lamp's rotation and the waves' rhythm create a gentle metronome, guiding you through the night. You realize fully that this is one of the core ways long evenings are endured, not by distraction, but by quiet attention and gentle presence. As you lean back, you feel a deep, pervasive calm. This is the heartbeat of the tower at night, subtle yet persistent, an invisible companion for your solitary watch. You're standing there. You are fully awake yet suspended in a space where observation coexists seamlessly, and the hours stretch before you, soft and uninterrupted. After some time of listening, you decide to return to the lamp room, not out of necessity, but because the rhythm of the evening calls for it. You're climbing the familiar spiral staircase once again. You notice how the night air feels different now, slightly cooler, slightly heavier with moisture from the sea. You're standing there. Mainstream historical 19th century lighthouse often became condensation traps at night, leading keepers to constantly monitor both the structure and the lamp to prevent damp-related issues. You pause halfway, feeling the stone under your hands and feet. You're standing there noticing subtle vibrations as the tower settles under its own weight. The echoes of your boots are familiar companions now. You're standing there. Historians still argue whether the tactile awareness developed by repeated stair climbs contributed significantly to keepers' coordination or merely reflected constant repetition. Quirky tidbits: some keepers would hum or quietly recite poetry during these climbs, not out of necessity but as a way to mark time and stave off monotony. You find yourself repeating a line from a long-forgotten rhyme, just softly enough that it blends with the ambient creaks of the tower. The sound is comforting, a reminder that humans have always sought patterns, even when alone. Reaching the top, the lamp room feels alive, though nothing has changed except your presence. The lens glows steadily, oil reservoirs full, wicks trimmed. Everything appears perfect, but perfection in a lighthouse is never accidental. You run your fingers along the railing and the brass mechanisms, checking for subtle signs of wear or misalignment. Tiny adjustments now prevent big problems later. Historians still argue whether this obsessive attention to detail prevented accidents more effectively than modern inspections, or simply reinforced discipline. You tidy the immediate area around the lamp, brushing away dust, arranging cloths and tools. Quirky tidbit: some keepers had favorite rags, claiming that certain textures or ages of cloth polish the lens better. It might seem absurd, but after decades, small rituals like this became part of the work itself, offering comfort in repetition. The beam rotates steadily above the dark sea. You notice the way its movement divides the night into gentle segments. You're standing there. Each sweep marks a subtle passage of time, and your mind, conditioned by hours of monotony, synchronizes with it. A light joke surfaces. You're essentially a human metronome with scenic responsibilities. You smile quietly. Now, you check the lamp's mechanisms more thoroughly. You're ensuring the rotation is smooth and unbroken. Even slight hesitations could affect how ships perceive the light, and while human error is minor here, the weight of responsibility is never negligible. Historians still argue whether keepers internalize this responsibility as stress or as a form of meditative focus. You pause by the window, glancing outward. The horizon is darker now, punctuated only by distant ship lights or the faint glow of the moon. Each observation is brief but deliberate. You breathe in the salty air, feeling a subtle connection between tower, sea, and self. You're standing there. The isolation that once might have oppressive now feels structured and safe. Quirky tidbitting: some keepers kept a small notebook just for observations of moonlight and tides, recording patterns that had no official use but offered mental engagement. You imagine doing the same, noticing how the reflected moonlight moves across waves, a gentle, unspoken companion to your duty. As you adjust the lens panel slightly, ensuring perfect alignment, the evening's rhythm flows through your body. Hands, eyes, and mind all coordinate in this practiced ballad of attention. Each small act, cleaning, polishing, adjusting, becomes a meditative movement, reinforcing your presence and grounding the long night. You lean back slightly, letting the lamp room's warmth and gentle hum of the mechanism envelop you. The tower itself feels alive in subtle ways, responding to the rhythm of wind, wave, and rotation. You are part of this ecosystem now, attentive, aware, and in sync. The long night stretches before you, not empty. You're standing there, but full of gentle tasks and quiet awareness, each moment cared in care and continuity. You linger in the lamp room for a while, simply observing the beam's steady rotation. It slices across the dark water in slow, hypnotic sweeps, each pass a quiet reminder that you are not idle, even when motion seems minimal. Mainstream historical fact before automation. A keeper's vigilance ensured that the lamp never faltered, and that the light reached as far as its Fresnel lens was designed to project. Every sweep counts, and every second of attention matters. You move to inspect the wick again, ensuring the flame remains even and bright. The wick trimming is subtle work, almost ritualistic: cut too much, and the light dies; cut too little, and smoke clouds the lens. Historians still argue whether the meticulous care of Wicks was purely functional or if it also served as a meditative practice that kept keepers' minds occupied during long hours of darkness. Quirky tidbit: some keepers claim to give their wicks names or whisper encouragement to the flame, as though the light itself required companionship. You smile faintly at the absurdity, but also at the comfort it must have brought to those isolated souls. Perhaps the lamp was less of a tool and more of a quiet partner, its steady presence grounding the long night. As you polish a brass fitting near the base of the lamp, you notice the subtle warmth radiating from the flame. The heat is mild but reassuring, a tactile reminder that your labor sustains life beyond the tower. The lamp is not merely light, it is the embodiment of purpose, your constant companion to your quiet attentions. Historians still argue whether the intimate connection keepers felt toward the lamp influenced their emotional resilience, or if it was a byproduct of long isolation. You pause and listen. The wind whispers across the tower stone, the waves drum gently against the rocks below, and the creak of the mechanism punctuates the otherwise steady hum. These sounds, constant and familiar, create a symphony of solitude. Quirky tidbit: some keepers believed they could Red. The seas moved through these combined sounds, anticipating shifts before any visual cue appeared. You try to hear the subtle nuances yourself. Let them fill the quiet corners of your mind. The air smells faintly of oil, warm stone, and sea salt. You're standing there. You inhale slowly, letting the sensory blend reinforce your awareness of place and purpose. This is part of the evening's rhythm, the mingling of senses, each reminding you that you are both witness and caker. A light joke flits through your thoughts. You become a professional observer of heat, sound, and rotation. Surely an unusual wry-sum entry. You smile, accepting the gentle absurdity, then return to the careful motions of polishing, trimming, and checking. Each task feeds into the next, an unbroken chain of deliberate attention. You glance through the lantern windows again. The sea seems endless, the horizon stretching infinitely in all directions. The beam continues its sweep, unchanging yet ever new, as it moves across the darkened water. You're standing there. There is a strange comfort in this continuity, a reassurance that though nights are long, your presence maintains order and safety. As you straighten a cloth and tuck it neatly away, you sense the subtle satisfaction of completion. Minor tasks may seem inconsequential individually, but together they create a structure for the evening, a pattern that allows your mind to settle. Even isolation framed by purpose and rhythm becomes a form of companionship. The quiet of the tower invites you to reflect as you continue your rounds. You move down to inspect the stairs and railings once more, a habitual check that reassures you that nothing has shifted unexpectedly. Mainstream historical fact keepers were trained to identify structural weaknesses early because a minor flaw could escalate in harsh coastal conditions. Vigilance was preventative, and repetition made it second nature. You run your fingers along the cool wood of the railing, feeling subtle imperfections, slight warps or small cracks that tell the story of decades of exposure to wind, salt, and human touch. Historians still argue whether this tactile awareness was instinctual or learned, though every keeper seems to develop it with time. Quirky tidbitting. Some keepers could identify a loose step blindfolded, simply by stepping and listening to the sound. You test your own perception now, tapping lightly, listening intently, and noting each echo. Descending slowly, you pause at the landing to glance out a small window. The night sky is clear, stars reflected faintly in the waves. No lights from ships yet, only the steady presence of water, moonlight, and your own breath. You're standing there. The observation itself becomes a small ritual, not for duty but for the subtle pleasure of connection to the wider world. Historians still argue whether this attention to celestial navigation, occasionally necessary for calculating position, was secondary to psychological benefit. You're standing there. A light joke surfaces. If anyone were to ask what your evening sport is, you'd say, professional step tapping with ocean accompaniment. And it wouldn't even be an exaggeration. You smile quietly, enjoying the absurdity in solitude. You check a small cupboard near the stairwell where spare cloths and minor tools are stored. Organization here is crucial. Your misplaced item could waste precious minutes or disrupt a workflow. Quirky tidbit, some keepers created mnemonic rhymes to remember the exact order of supplies, a secret little game that made repetitive tasks slightly more engaging. You hum one such rhyme softly, blending practicality with quiet amusement. You're standing there. Returning to the lamp room briefly, you notice how the ambient light from the lamp casts long shadows on the walls and stairs. The rotating beam above creates a mesmerizing pattern of light and dark, a slow-moving visual rhythm that matches the auditory rhythm of the sea outside. You're standing there. Historians still argue whether these environmental patterns contributed subconsciously to keepers' sense of calm or merely provided visual interest. You're standing there. You touch the brass of the lens housing, feeling its smooth surface under your fingertips. Every polish, every careful check reinforces the sense that the tower is, with subtle cues, a living workspace that responds to attention and care. You're standing there. The beam continues its rotations, indifferent to your musings, yet wholly dependent on your diligence. You notice again the smell of oil and the faint residue of salt carried in from the wind. These sensory markers become temporal signposts. Your standing reminds you of previous evenings and past tasks. Quirky tidbit, some keepers claimed that a certain blend of oil and stone indicate the right time to inspect machinery, almost like a weather oracle. You breathe in deliberately. You're standing there, allowing the sensory memory to ground you. Finally, you take a moment to rest on the stairs, feeling the wood beneath you, listening to the rhythmic sweep of the beam and the steady whisper of the waves. The tower feels less like a building and more like an extension of your senses, each surface, sound, and motion reinforcing the quiet, deliberate cadence of the night. You rise again, ready to continue minor checks, polishing, and adjustments. Each movement, though repetitive, is infused with purpose. The evening unfolds slowly, shaped not by urgency but by the careful accumulation of small, precise actions. You're standing there, each connecting you more firmly to the lighthouse, the sea, and the gentle passage of time. You return to the quarters briefly. You're standing there. You're feeling the warmth of the lamp's residual heat on the stairwell walls. Sitting quietly, you consider one of the subtler aspects of lighthouse lifing, record keeping beyond logs and letters. This includes small personal notes, sketches, or observations about the night that don't fit into official documentation. Mainstream historical fact, some 19th century keepers made private notebooks, often recording birds' tides, or minor curiosities, which today provide historians with unique insights into daily life. You open your own small notebook, a thin, leather-bound volume. The pages are faintly yellowed, slightly curled at the edges. You run your fingers over the surface before writing, appreciating the tactile reassurance. Each word is deliberate. Unlike the logbook, these notes are private, unpolished, and personal. Historians still argue whether the habit of private journaling improved resilience or merely provided a harmless outlet for isolation-induced thoughts. Quirky tidbits: some keepers drew miniature illustrations of passing birds or tiny doodles of imagined seascapes, often blending whimsy with meticulous observation. You sketch a quick line of waves, noticing the way shadows and light interact with the paper under the lamplight. The act is soothing, a small creative break amid repetitive duties. You note observations of the sea, wind patterns, and even the behavior of light across the waves. Each entry is brief, almost shorthanded, but the process trains your attention. You write slowly, letting your mind wander gently with the rhythm of pen on paper. A light joke drifts in. If anyone ever accused you of slacking, you could claim extensive oceanography research, and it would be technically true. You smile softly, returning to your work. You're standing there. You include small reflections on your own physical state: stiff shoulders, mild chill from the sea breeze, and the subtle fatigue from climbing stairs repeatedly. These are not complaints, but markers of presence. Tiny reminders that your body is engaged, that you exist fully in this time and place. Historians still argue whether such self-monitoring was consciously beneficial or simply an adaptive habit born of long hours alone. You pause to listen as you write. You're standing there, the distant sweep of the lamp beam, the quiet thrum of the waves, and the occasional whisper of wind across the tower create a gentle background hum. It's almost musical, a natural metronome that guides your handwriting and thought. You feel a calm that comes from being fully aligned with the environment, the pen flowing in sync with the rhythm of the night. The notebook fills gradually. Each entry, though minor, accumulates into a tangible sense of order. You're standing there, a personal chronicle that marks the passage of time in a deliberate, reflective manner. You close it carefully. You're standing there, pressing your hands over the cover for a moment to print the tactile reassurance of completion. Quirky tidbit: some keepers believe touching their notebooks this way helped seal the night's observations, as if the act conferred permanence to fleeting thoughts. You stand and stretch, letting the quiet work of journaling settle into your consciousness. These private moments, small and deliberate, form the hidden spine of the evening, connecting observation and routine. The tower, the sea, and the lamp all continue their rhythms around you, steady and dependable, while you, too, move gently with the flow. Feeling the steady pulse of the night, yang there, you decide it's time to inspect the lens and lantern one more time. Even minor imperfections can affect visibility, and in the 19th century, a lighthouse's reliability depended entirely on your diligence. Mainstream historical fact keepers routinely polished, adjusted. You're standing there, and sometimes even disassembled parts of the Fresnel lens to ensure optimal light projection. Every rotation of the beam matters. Every lapse could endanger vessels miles away. You approach the lamp carefully, noting the slight warmth radiating from the burning flame. The air smells faintly of oil, stone, and the salt-laden breeze drifting through the windows. You take a soft cloth and begin polishing the brass fittings, moving slowly, methodically. Historians still argue whether this obsessive polishing was functional, symbolic, or simply a meditative habit adopted over decades of isolation. Quirky tidbit, you're standing there. Some keepers developed personal rituals, like circling the lens 3 times with a cloth or speaking quietly to the mechanism, believing it would cooperate more willingly. You hum a soft, meaningless tune as you work, blending practical action with a subtle comfort born of repetition. You inspect each lens panel, noting minute scratches or imperfections. Tiny irregularities could distort the light beam. You rotate the lens slightly, ensuring smooth motion and balanced alignment. The mechanical hum accompanies the rotation, a soothing background that has become part of your evening's soundtrack. Historians still argue whether constant focus on minor lens adjusts provided mental engagement or subtly heightened anxiety about potential mistakes. Stepping back, you watch the beam sweep over the dark waters. Each pass marks time, a moving measure of hours that stretches without tension. Your mind synchronizes with the rhythm. You're standing there. A light joke drifts through. You're essentially a human observer for a spinning light, the world's quietest DJ. You chuckle softly. You're standing there, letting it settle into the hum of the night. You check the oil reservoir one last time, confirming that the fuel level is sufficient for hours ahead. You're standing there. The wick appears even and bright, responding predictably to air currents and gravity. Quirky tidbitting. Some keepers were known to trim wicks at precisely the same minute each hour, claiming it harmonized with the lamp's rotation. Whether superstition or precision, the practice offered structure and comfort. As you tidy the immediate area, arranging cloths and tools, you notice how the lamp's glow interacts with the shadows on the walls and stairwell. The interplay of light and darkness creates a subtle, hypnotic pattern, helping to pace the remaining hours. Historians still argue whether keepers internalized this rhythm consciously or simply absorbed it through repeated exposure. You lean against the railing, listening again to the familiar ambient sounds, wind brushing the tower, distant waves, the faint squeak of rotating machinery. The physical act of inspection has merged with observation, creating a seamless flow between body, mind, and environment. Finally, you step away. You're standing there, feeling satisfied with the lamp's condition. Every pawl polished, every wick checked, every mechanism verified. You're standing there, the light continues its unbroken sweep across the water, indifferent yet dependent on your vigilance. In these long hours, it is both anchor and companion, a steady presence against the vast, dark expanse outside. With the lamp secure, you move to another subtle yet essential task, checking the storage of supplies. The pantry, tool cupboard, and any small storage spaces must remain orderly, because even minor disorganization can cause frustration or mistakes during long evenings. Your mainstream historical factual lighthouse keepers maintained meticulously organized supplies: oil, wicks, spare parts, food, ensuring quick access in emergencies and a predictable routine in otherwise isolated conditions. You run your hands along the shelves, straightening tins, stacking tools neatly, and ensuring cloths are folded consistently. Historians still argue whether this obsessive tidiness served practical purposes, your psychological comfort, or a combination of both. Quirky tidbit, some keepers assigned playful nicknames to storage containers or tools: Captain Whale or Squeaky Screw, as a way to humanize the inanimate and stave off loneliness. You examine the food supplies, noting minor humidity effects from the sea air. Salted meats are firm, dried beans remain dry, and flour is carefully stored in tightly sealed containers. Any pest intrusion is noted immediately. Some keepers even kept tiny traps for mice and insects, joking that these small creatures were unofficial night assistants. You smile faintly, acknowledging the practicality and humor. Next, you check the spare lamp oil and replacement wicks. These items are critical, though rarely used at night unless something goes wrong. You rotate bottles gently. You're standing there testing for leaks or sediment at the bottom. The act is deliberate, calming, and surprisingly meditative. Historians still argue whether this attention to minute details was primarily habit, necessity, or a form of stress management. Quirky tidbit, You're standing there. Some keepers developed a ritual of counting supplies aloud, almost like a chant, to reassure themselves that everything was in order. You find yourself performing a silent version of this practice, your mind tracing the inventory with methodical precision. The rhythm soothes as much as it informs. You tidy tools, wiping metal surfaces, straightening hammers and screwdrivers. Even minor imperfections in placement seem to demand correction. The process is absorbing, occupying both hands and mind without requiring urgency. A light joke drifts in if you were a professional organizer. This tower would be your flagship project. You chuckle quietly, appreciating the amusement without needing an audience. Finally, you step back and take in the organized space. Everything has a place. Nothing is out of order. The tactile satisfaction of neat mints complements the mental reassurance that everything needed for emergencies is at hand. The evening feels anchored, structured by these small acts of care. You pause, listening to the familiar background, the beam's steady rotation above, waves whispering against rocks, wind sighing through the tower's crevices. Even in stillness, the lighthouse is alive. Your attentive presence ties it all together, linking physical order with mental rhythm. In these small tasks, evenings are made bearable, not by excitement or novelty, but by control, predictability. You're standing there, in quiet engagement with the environment. The night stretches before you, orderly and unhurried, each chore and check a gentle companion to the endless sweep of the lamp. You take a deep breath, ready to move into the quieter, reflective portion of the evening, letting observation, thought, and meditation unfold seamlessly. With the storage checked and organized, you turn toward one of the subtler rituals of lighthouse life. You're standing there, monitoring the oil lamp's flame behavior. This isn't simply about illumination. It's a form of continuous observation that keeps you engaged during the long hours. Mainstream historical fact: in the 19th century, keepers carefully noted the consistency of the flame, adjusting wicks, cleaning chimneys, and ensuring that the light remained steady across all rotations. You lean slightly closer, noting the flame's height, color, and flicker. Your tiny shifts signal changes in airflow or oil quality. Historians still argue whether this attentiveness improved safety significantly or primarily served as a meditative focus that sustained mental resilience. You're standing there. Quirky tidbits: some keepers claim that a flame that danced too much at night indicated that the sea itself was restless. Standing there, a superstition blending observation with imagination. You adjust a small vent slightly, watching the flame respond almost immediately. The flame's motion becomes a subtle partner in your evening, a living indicator of both mechanical function and atmospheric conditions. The process is slow, deliberate. You're standing there and hypnotic. Each movement feeds into the tower's quiet rhythm, reinforcing a sense of purpose that stretches across hours. The lamp's gentle warmth touches your hands and face, a small comfort in the otherwise cool stone tower. You notice the smell of oil, faint and reassuring, mingling with the saltiness drifting through the open window. Quirky tidbit: some keepers could identify different oil brands by scent alone, an almost absurd but practical skill developed from long exposure. You inhale deliberately, letting the combination of warmth, smell, and soft light settle your senses. As you lean back slightly, you allow your mind to wander across the day's previous tasks: stair inspections, lamp maintenance, log updates, letter writing, a pantry organization, and sea listening. Each chore forms a sequential rhythm, now punctuated by the subtle, continuous adjustments to the flame. A light joke surfaces: if you ever wanted a career as a professional flame whisperer, congratulations, you are well qualified. You smile quietly. You're letting the humor blend with the calm of the moment. You check the wick once more, trimming it lightly. Even the smallest adjustment matters, and the precision required encourages a slow, mindful pace. You're standing there. Historians still argue whether keepers develop fine motor skills superior to the average 19th century worker, or whether the perception of skill was magnified by necessity and routine. The beam sweeps over the water in smooth, predictable arcs. You allow yourself to watch it briefly, noting how the light glances across small waves, reflects faintly on distant objects, and returns. There is a satisfying symmetry to the rotation, a comforting regularity that structures the night. Quirky tidbit: some keepers compared the sweep of the lamp to the tick of a clock, imagining time flowing in tangible slices between each pass. Finally, you're settled into a quiet observation posture, letting the flame beam and ambient sounds coalesce into a gentle background hum. The lighthouse, the lamp, and the sea work together, each motion reinforcing your own steady presence. These subtle attentions, the flame's behavior, the rhythm of light, the whisper of waves, anchor the evening. Long nights here are not filled with excitement, but with a measured, mindful engagement that is quietly satisfying. You're perfectly suited to a slow, sleepy mind. Having tended to the lamp, you shift focus to another gentle form of engagement, observing the night sky. You're standing there. The view from the tower is expansive, unobstructed by city lights or modern clutter. Mainstream historical facted, you're standing there. Lighthouse keepers often made informal notes about celestial events, from the phases of the moon to the appearance of comets, contributing small but valuable observations to early astronomy records. You lean against the windowsill, feeling the cool stone beneath your hands. You're standing there. The stars are faintly shimmering, scattered like tiny lanterns across the velvet black sky. You're standing there. Historians still argue whether keepers' ascension to heavens had practical navigation purposes, or if it mostly served as meditative relief during long hours of solitude. Quirky tidbit: some keepers reportedly named constellations after friends, ships, or local landmarks, a personal touch that transformed the infinite sky into a familiar map. You trace patterns with your eyes. You're standing there, noting a shooting star gliding across the horizon. For a moment, time feels suspended. The sweep of the lamp below synchronizes subtly with the slow arc of the celestial sphere, an unspoken rhythm of observation and reflection. Your mind allows itself to wander gently along these patterns, connecting past and present, light and dark, earth and sea. A light joke drifts through. You're essentially a part-time astronomer, meteorologist, and poet, though none of your certificates exist. You smile quietly, appreciating the private absurdity, letting it settle in with the night's calm. You note the moon's position relative to the horizon and waves, appreciating the way it illuminates distant water, casting silvery reflections that contrast with the lamp's golden glow. Quirky tidbitting, you're standing there. Some keepers believe that the moon's phase subtly influenced the sea's temperament, though of course it's more observation than superstition. Historians still argue whether these observations informed early tidal calculations or existed mainly as comforting patterns. The wind brushes gently against your face, carrying the faint scent of salt, wet stone, and distant vegetation. You take a slow breath, letting it mingle with the soft warmth of the lamp inside. Even small sensory details seem heightened at night. The temperature difference between tower and open air, the tactile feel of worn wood under your fingertips. You're standing there, the way the horizon stretches endlessly. You return briefly to your logbook, jotting down a few lines about stars and moonlight. The act is light, almost perfunctory, but it provides structure. Keeping notes, even casual ones, frames the evening in rhythm and continuity. The tower, lamp, and sea become partners in an ongoing narrative observation, quietly guiding your awareness without pressure or urgency. You glance up once more, letting the eyes follow the gentle sweep of the beam across water, then drift to the heavens above. The night feels both vast and intimate. Your body, mind, and senses are aligned with the environment, tuned to rhythm, repetition, and small details. The combination of light, sea, and stars forms a kind of slow-motion symphony, a soothing soundtrack for the long night. You exhale softly, feeling the calm permeate your posture and thoughts. The tasks completed, the observations made, and the rhythms internalized, all of it reinforces a sense of quiet stability. This is the heart of lighthouse life. You're standing there, attentive solitude, steady routines, and the gentle unfolding of time, one measured observation at a time. After noting the sky, you're standing there. You shift your focus back to the interior, taking a few quiet moments to attend to personal care and comfort. Long nights in a lighthouse aren't just about maintaining the lamp and tower. They're about sustaining yourself physically and mentally. Mainstream historical fact T. 19th century keepers often had strict routines for meals, hygiene, and rest, ensuring they remained functional and alert throughout isolation and duty. You wash standing there. You wash your hands and face in a basin, the water cool but not unpleasant, carrying the faint scent of soap and sea air. You notice how small gestures, Rolling up sleeves, carefully drying hands, smoothing hair become rituals, grounding the mind as much as the body. Historians still argue whether these deliberate routines were survival strategies, mental discipline, or simply attempts to reclaim normalcy in an unusual environment. Quirky tidbits: some keepers kept miniature comfort kits with combs, brushes, and scented cloths, treating them like treasures. You're standing there. You handle your own tools with similar care, appreciating the tactile sensation and the slight pleasure of mundane familiarity. Even small, repetitive motions offer reassurance and rhythm to the evening. You move toward a chair or small bench and stretch gently, loosening stiff joints from climbing stairs, leaning over the lamp, or writing at the desk. Each stretch reminds you of the physical demands quietly embedded in the night's routines. Quirky tidbit: your certain keepers develop small exercise routines, arm circles, foot stretches, and squats, to prevent stiffness without disturbing the lamp or logs. You imitate a few subtle movements, careful to remain quiet, feeling the slow relief of tension melting away. You return briefly to the lamp. You're standing there, adjusting the flame slightly, a last check before allowing yourself a small pause. The warm glow touches your face, casting long shadows across the walls and your own hands. You feel both protective of the tower and comforted by its steady presence. Historians still argue whether keepers' attachment to the lamp reflected duty, superstition, or a deep psychological reliance on a constant, predictable companion. A light joke drifts through. If anyone asked what your evening workout consisted of, you could say, staircase yoga with lamp oversight. And it wouldn't be untrue. You smile, appreciating the quiet amusement in solitude. Finally, you settle into the chair, letting your body and mind absorb the calm of the environment. The sounds of the sea, the hum of the lamp, the faint creak of wood, and the distant wind become a gentle backdrop. You are fully aware of the night's rhythm, present in the interplay of duties, rituals, and observations. For a few minutes, you allow yourself to simply exist, attentive but relaxed. You're anchored in the tower and its steady, encompassing world. Settled in the chair, you let your thoughts drift toward the surrounding environment, noticing small details you might otherwise overlook. The lighthouse, though simple in structure, contains an intricate network of sounds, textures, and movements. Your mainstream historical fact: keepers often attune themselves to subtle changes in the tower's creaks, the machinery's hum, or even the way oil lamps flickered, using these cues to anticipate maintenance needs before anything became urgent. You trace the contours of the walls with your fingers, feeling every groove and imperfection. Historians still argue whether this tactile attentiveness was consciously functional or a subconscious method for time passage during solitary nights. Quirky tidbit: some keepers could detect minor structural shifts simply by leaning against the walls and noticing subtle vibrations. You try it, imagining yourself as a human sensor, feeling the tower breathe along with the wind. A soft breeze drifts through a slightly open window, carrying hints of salt water and distant seaweed. You inhale slowly, letting the scent ground you. Quirky tidbit: some keepers kept small jars of herbs or flowers from the mainland as a personal comfort against the monotony and smell of sea air. You consider that idea now, appreciating how even small sensory pleasures can lift the spirit. You glance around the lamp room and quarters, noting small details: the placement of tools. You're standing there, the position of chairs, the subtle dust on a shelf. Nothing is alarming, yet each observation reassures you that everything is in order. You're standing there. The repetition of checks is calming, almost hypnotic, creating a rhythm of attention that carries you gently through the night. Historians still argue whether the mental patterns developed during these routines fostered meditative focus or subtle anxiety. You're standing there, though keepers often reported a sense of accomplishment. A light joke surfaces: if the tower had a personality. You're standing there. You imagine it quietly judging your neatness or approving your rhythm of movement. You smile, letting the idea settle in alongside the hum of the lamp and the whisper of waves outside. You lean back and close your eyes briefly. You're standing there, letting the sounds and smells of the lighthouse envelop you. The rhythm of light sweeping across the sea, the distant creak of machinery, your faint chorus of nocturnal birds, all form a symphony of gentle motion. Each small sensory cue reinforces the perception that the night is moving at a comfortable pace, one that you have helped structure with deliberate, attentive action. After a few moments, you allow your attention to shift internally, reflecting on the accumulated quiet work of the evening. Ludders, lamp checks, maintenance, observation, journaling, all interweave into a continuous sequence, a nightly choreography of tasks that sustains the lighthouse and keeps you engaged. You're standing there. The simplicity of these repeated actions, combined with the natural rhythms of sea and light, fosters a unique calm. You're standing there, a sense of being present with urgency or distraction. You exhale slowly, feeling the gentle weight of night settle around you. You're standing there, anchoring your mind and body in the quiet persistence of the tower. Each sound, motion, and task now blends seamlessly. You're standing there, creating a soothing continuity that carries you effortlessly forward. Your awareness drifts gently toward the outside once more, drawn by the familiar cadence of waves against the rocks. Even with the lamp functioning perfectly, there's a rhythm to the sea that demands quiet attention. Mainstream historical fact: lighthouse keepers often developed acute observational skills, noting subtle shifts in tide, swell, and wind direction, sometimes predicting weather changes hours in advance. You stand near the window, tracing the faint glimmer of the beam across the dark water. The moon is higher now. You're casting pale reflections that dance atop the waves. Historians still argue whether keepers relied more on instinct or accumulated experience when interpreting these subtle signs, though few would have neglected them entirely. Quirky tidbits: some keepers claimed that the sea sang in different keys depending on the wind, assigning playful musical notes to waves' varying pitches. You hum along softly, letting the thought intertwine with the sea's natural sounds. The air is cooler now. You're standing there, brushing against your face and hands. You notice small details: the way water droplets cling to the rocks, the faint smell of wet seaweed, the distant cry of an owl or seabird. These sensory keys are grounding, reminding you that even in isolation, life persists outside the tower. Quirky tidbit: some keepers kept small notebooks just for these nighttime observations, recording the behavior of animals, tides, and weather patterns, which often served as a mental exercise to stave off monotony. You step back slightly, letting the soundscape fill the space. The beam rotates steadily above the dark sea, and your mind synchronizes with its rhythm. Each sweep of light marks an invisible measure of time, reinforcing the passage of hours without the need for clocks or interruptions. A light joke drifts through your minding. If anyone doubted your evening multitasking, you could claim you were simultaneously an astronomer, meteorologist, and composer. You smile quietly, enjoying the private humor. Returning inside, you're standing there. You take a slow walk through the quarters, inspecting familiar surfaces. The lamp's warmth is gentle against your face and hands. You're standing there. Each object you touch, the polished brass, the worn steps, the smooth wood of the railing, anchors your presence. His standing there. Historians still argue whether these tactile interactions provided comfort purely from familiarity, or whether they created a subtle, subconscious feedback loop of reassurance and focus. You settle back into the chair, letting the ambient light and gentle hum of the lamp fill the room. The sea's rhythm, the rotating beam, and your own bodily awareness create a delicate triangle of calm, a triad of sensory and cognitive engagement. Quirky tidbit: you're standing there. Some keepers would quietly narrate imagined stories to themselves, assigning personalities to waves or clouds. To stave off the monotony of night, you're considered doing the same, inventing soft mental tales that drift along with the tide. As the hours pass, the night feels neither empty nor burdensome. Each movement, observation, and quiet reflection contributes to a sense of completeness. The tower, the lamp, the sea, and you are engaged in a slow, harmonious dance. You're standing there, uninterrupted and entirely self-contained. The gentle attention to detail, the rhythmic passage of light. You're standing there, and the serene auditory environment collectively anchor your consciousness, preparing you for the final stretch of the evening. By now, the night has deepened. You're standing there, and the tower feels like a cocoon, insulated from the world beyond the cliffs and waves. You move slowly, deliberately, letting each step, each motion be both a task and a meditation. Mainstream historical fact: lighthouse keepers often followed such a rhythm at night, alternating between small cores, observation, and quiet reflection to maintain mental acuity. You check the lamp one final time before allowing yourself to relax, observing the flame in rotation with practiced eyes. Historians still argue whether these repeated inspections erred significantly or simply provided a soothing, predictable structure to long hours. Quirky tidbit: some keepers claim the lamp knew when you were present, flickering subtly as if in acknowledgement, though logically, of course, it didn't. You smile, entertained by the thought, feeling the warmth of routine. Next, you wander to the window and gaze outward. The sea is darker now, with only the beam cutting a steady arc across the water. Waves murmur against the rocks, and the distant stars reflect faintly in the ripples. Quirky tidbit: some keepers imagined friendly faces or ships in the reflections, turning isolation into a gentle mental game. You hum a line of soft, "You're standing there," nonsensical rhyme to accompany the scene, letting it blend with the natural rhythm of the night. You return to the desk, opening your notebook to jot a few last observations: wind changes, subtle noises, moonlight reflections. Each note is deliberate, a small record of presence and perception. Historians still argue whether these annotations were practical or primarily psychological tools, but you know that they anchor you in both time and space. Sitting in the chair, you feel the combined effect of tactile tasks, auditory observation, standing there and visual monitoring a calm rhythm that has carried you through the evening. The lamp's warmth, the tactile familiarity of the tower. You're standing there, and the ambient sounds coalesce into a gentle sensory equilibrium. A light joke drifts through congratulations. You've successfully attended to every detail of a tower while being largely ignored by the outside world. You chuckle softly. You stretch lightly, easing the intention from stair climbs, lamp checks, and hours of quiet observation. You're standing there. Each minor motion reminds you of your body's role in this delicate balance between activity and calm. Quirky tidbit: you're standing there. Some keepers swore that gentle stretching enhanced their alertness without disturbing the lamp, a small ritual of physical maintenance accompanying mental attentiveness. Finally, you settle back fully into the chair, allowing the night to envelop you completely. The lamp rotates, waves murmur, wind whispers, and the tower creaks subtly under its own weight. You feel simultaneously aware and surrendered, present yet drifting toward the gentle edge of sleep. This is the essence of the long lighthouse night, a harmony of duty, observation, and serene presence, each moment linking seamlessly to the next, creating a cocoon of quiet and continuity that carries you forward until dawn. The night has settled into a slow, unbroken rhythm, and you feel the accumulated weight of hours softened by quiet familiarity. You take a final round through the lamp room and quarters, not because anything is urgent, but because these small motions anchor the evening. Mainstream historical fact: you're standing there. Keepers often repeated checks at predictable intervals to maintain a sense of control and order during long, isolated nights. You run your hands gently along the railings, the polished brass, and the smooth stone, appreciating the subtle textures that have become companions. You're standing there. Historians still argue whether these tactile rituals were consciously calming or simply habits honed over decades of repetition. Quirky tidbitting: you're standing there. Some keepers claimed they could hear the tower's creaks differently when something was off, developing an almost musical relationship with the building's nightly symphony. You pause to listen, feeling attuned to the faintest shifts. Returning to the lamp, you're standing there. You make one last inspection of the flame. Its steady glow reassures you. The rotation remains smooth, the light reaching across the water, unbroken and consistent. A quirky tidbit: some keepers imagined the lamp as a gentle guardian, silently acknowledging their presence. You smile at the thought. You're standing there, letting it fold into the calm of the night. You settle in the chair for the final period of stillness, allowing yourself to become fully absorbed by the combined rhythms of lamp, tower, and sea. Every sense participates: the gentle warmth of oil lamps. You're standing there. The faint hum of mechanics, the whisper of waves, the salty breath of wind. Each subtle cue reinforces a quiet sense of continuity and safety. Historians still argue whether this sensory immersion enhanced vigilance or was primarily a meditative adaptation to isolation. A light joke drifts through your minding. If the tower could speak, it might congratulate you on surviving yet another night. Your presence is constant and reliable as the beam itself. You let the humor dissolve into the calm, a private smile to accompany the pervasive quiet. You close your eyes briefly, reflecting on the evening's sequence egg cleaning, polishing, trimming wicks, journaling, observing the sea and stars, stretching, and minor maintenance. Each task blended seamlessly into the next, creating an almost hypnotic cadence. The long hours, once potentially monotonous, have been transformed by rhythm, attention, and mindful observation. You breathe slowly, feeling the soft weight of fatigue mingle with satisfaction. The tower, the lamp, the sea, and your own deliberate actions have coalesced into a gentle, ordered ecosystem. You feel present, attentive, yet ready to drift into rest, cradled by the ambient sounds and steady routines that define the night. The lighthouse stands sentinel, but now, for a few quiet hours, so does your mind and body, suspended in a calm equilibrium that prepares you for gentle sleep. Now, as the night reaches its softest point, you allow yourself to slow completely. The stairs, the lamp, the tools, the notes, they can wait. You're standing there, you feel your body release tension, sinking gently into the chair or cot, surrendering to the quiet pulse of the lighthouse around you. The lamp's gentle glow becomes less important as your mind turns inward, focused on breath, warmth, and sensation. The sound of waves is steady and unhurried, the distant wind brushing softly against stone, a lullaby composed of the elements themselves. You notice each inhale and exhale are the rhythm of your own body sensing with the tower's environment. There's no rush, no task to complete. Time stretches slowly, measured only by the familiar rotation of light outside your window and the whisper of the sea. You let your thoughts drift, acknowledging them without grasping. You're letting them pass like clouds across the night sky. Your muscles loosen, small residual H's from the evening's movements fading into gentle warmth. You feel the continuity of the night, the subtle reassurance of everything in its proper place. The lamp, the stairs, the railings, the notebooks, the air, the distant horizon. Even in solitude, you are held by the patterns you've nurtured and observed, by the repetition and the quiet attentiveness that have defined these hours. The world outside is distant, abstract, while here you exist fully in a safe, familiar space. Each sensation, warmth, sound, scent, and soft illumination, blends into a gentle cocoon. The lighthouse and your presence form a single, harmonious rhythm. You're standing there, the night unfolding around you in a slow, comforting cadence. You feel your mind softening, your eyelids heavy, your thoughts melting into quiet awareness. Rest comes naturally now, unforced, cradled by repetition, observation, and gentle attention. You are ready to drift, buoyed by calm and quiet. You're standing there, letting the night carry you into sleep with the soft, persistent heartbeat of lamp, tower, and sea.